Greetings, this is Ted A. Roberts with Seeking the Everlasting Gospel Ministries, and now we are getting on chapter 4 of my book, New Jerusalem, the Mother of Us All. And I just got through recording chapter 3, and it was very short, so I'm doing these back to back. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, this is chapter 4. This chapter is called The Garden Bride. Now let's turn our attention back again to the Bride of Christ. The Song of Solomon is a good book to learn about her. But before I can really get into speaking about her place therein, I have to speak of the high symbolisms of that book first. Again, I've mentioned already that I spent a good deal of time on a former book of mine called In the Beginning. It was spiritual from the very start, speaking of the obvious metaphors that the Bible has all throughout. So I'm not going to do so again here, but I will quote a few commentaries of some highly respected ministers of the past who share similar views as myself as to how they solved that particular book in question. So let's begin with John Gill in his exposition of the entire Bible, 1748 through 1763 and 1809. This is public domain. He says, Christ, of whom Solomon was a type, see Song of Solomon 3:7, of his person, his excellencies, love to his church, care of her, concern for her, and of the nearness and communion he admitted her to, and indulged her with the Jews have a saying that wherever the word Solomon is used in that song, the Holy One is meant, the Holy God, or Messiah, Jesus. Matthew Henry's commentary on the whole Bible, published 1708 to 1714, public domain. This is the Song of Songs, excellent above any others, for it is wholly taken up with the describing the excellencies of Christ and the love between him and his redeemed people. Jamison, Fawcett, and Brown commentary, published in 1871, public domain. King of Israel or Jerusalem is not added, as the opening of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, not because Solomon had not yet ascended the throne, but because his personality is hid under that of Christ, the true Solomon, equivalent to Prince of Peace. The earthly Solomon is not introduced here, which would break the consistency of the allegory. Though the bride bears the chief part, the song throughout is not hers, but that of her Solomon. He animates her. He and she, the head and the members, form but one Christ. Poor Man's Commentary by Robert Hawker, published 1805, public domain. The chapter opens with the giving the title of the book. The church then takes up the subject with expressing her love to Christ and desiring fresh manifestations of his affection to her. She compares his love to the fragrancy of the richest ointment. She prays to be drawn by him and professes her readiness to run after him. Okay, and then finally John Wesley's explanatory notes, 1755 through 1766, 1766, public domain. The song, the most excellent of all songs, and so this might well be called, whether you consider the author of it, who was a great prince and the wisest of all mortal men, or the subject of it, which is not Solomon, but the greater than Solomon, Christ, and his marriage with the church. One thing that's certain amongst these quoted scholars is the accepted notion that the Song of Solomon is a highly allegorical book in that we should not take it literally. Having this in mind, my own dad, who not only was a minister, was a barber at his profession, he liked to talk to his customers about the Bible whenever he got the chance. One day he happened to get a pastor in his chair, not of his personal acquaintance, but of a local assembly in our area. And when my dad asked him what he thought of the Song of Solomon, for my dad not only believed it the way that I believe it, but he was the first one to point out these things to me, that pastor was quick to reply, that Solomon, he was nothing but a dirty old man. Such is the carnal thinking of many learned men. Why, pray tell, would God simply include a dirty book into his sacred text for us to read and study from? Again, in order for us to successfully read that book, we need to leave all literalism aside. For this is perhaps the deepest, most spiritual book in the whole Bible. Maybe. So, saying, let me introduce my readers to some curious passages. And just as those commentators had suggested, Let's now imagine Jesus speaking here instead of Solomon. Song of Solomon 4:12. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Song of Solomon 5:1a. I come into my garden, who is my sister, my spouse. A garden is the bride? How curious is that? And does this garden have anything to do with the Garden of Eden? It's similar, for the Garden of Eden was the first wife of Jesus. Again, see my explanatory note in chapter 1 of this book called We Will Be Comforted in New Jerusalem for an explanation of the two wives of Jesus, that is, Old Jerusalem and New Jerusalem. And see again the prophecy of that divorce to the old one in Jeremiah 3, verse 8a. It would make sense that his first wife had to be Old Jerusalem because his new wife is the New Jerusalem. In the beginning there was a garden, and it was the paradise of God. And just like Old Jerusalem, New Jerusalem is also a garden. The greatest difference being that in this new garden, man will not fail a second time, for it is also the second heaven, whereas Old Jerusalem was the first heaven. Or these are the first and second works of God, or the first and second covenants.